Hello and welcome to the Pod of the Damned. I'm your host Ian, and not joining me as always is Nico. We have a special guest. I don't even think we can say special guest anymore, Boomer. To be honest with you, because I think you're right up there in fairness with Candy, but you and Candy have guested on this show so many times now that you're just our like guest that we pull out every once in a while. How you doing, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing really good. Yeah, it's a crazy ride that we've had together. Yeah, I started out as a fan of the show and then friend of the show, and then I guess you could call semi regular, not regular, but every once in a while collaborator as well. And it's an honor to be here.
Yes, and same for your show as well. Obviously, when you started that, I was just listening along, and then you had me on in those early days, and then again relatively recently. So we just sort of go back and forth now. We're just two podcasts that work very well together. What can we say? But
Share
yes,
the same vein of craziness.
yeah, which is a very rare thing to be honest. Yes, Nico is away on holiday for the next couple of weeks. Boomer has kindly agreed to step in relatively short notice as well, so thank you very much for agreeing to come on and talk about today's movie. It's gonna be an interesting one today. There's definitely a few talking points about the movie that we're covering today, but we will get into that in just a moment. Don't forget, we are a horror podcast that deep dives into a different topic every single week in our quest to create a leaderboard of the best and worst horror movies of all time. We are live on Twitch, and thank you very much, and hello to everyone who is currently joining us in the Twitch chat. Thank you for joining us and taking time out of your Sundays to come and listen to us to ramble on about horror movies live and in colour. If you would like to support us on our social media platforms, you can do so on Twitter at Damned Podcast. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Pod of the Damned. You can email us at podofthedamned@gmail.com, and you can subscribe to us on Patreon, which is patreon.com/Pod of the Damned. Boomer, where can people tell? Well, first of all, for anyone who's new to the show as well, I know a lot of our regular listeners will be very much aware of yourself and the podcast in the woods, but for anyone who has not listened to this show before, or indeed has listened to your show before, tell us a little bit about Podcast in the Woods and what you guys are working on just now.
Yeah, sure. So as you said, we are Podcast in the Woods, and we cover all kinds of things on horror. We just love the genre so much. And something else that I love is subjecting my wonderful and amazing co-host that I run this with, Gabby, to some incredible schlock, and it includes a lot of vomit, things that she hates, and that's kind of fun to that dynamic that we have. But we are on all podcasting platforms. You can find us basically anywhere. Google us. We are there. We are also on Twitter and Instagram as well at Woods Podcast. And we do have a Facebook page. You could just search Podcast in the Woods and you can find us there. And Gabby runs that one. So if you want to come on and talk shit about my picks and all that stuff, which I don't blame you one bit, I do have some horror hot takes sometimes. You could get on Facebook and talk to Gabby directly, and I have nothing to do with that. I can't even find it for some reason. I'm like terrible when it comes to Facebook.
Gabby, and she's just hidden it from you really well.
It's just, yeah, it's not even called Podcast the Wood. It's called Boomer Haters.
Oh, that might be a whole different group, to be honest. Oh, yes. Please go check out Podcast in the Woods. I have been a guest on there twice now. Back in the early days when it was, just Boomer in there, and then very recently for Scream 6. Oh, I keep forgetting which episodes I've been on though. We did Pieces, and I always forget what the other movie we did was. It was Pieces and something else.
You're Next. Yeah,
You're Next. I always forget that we did You're Next. But most recently, me, yourself, and Gabby were all talking about Scream 6, and we had a really cool discussion about that. If you would like to hear more of Boomer and Gabby on Pod of the Damned, used to were on this podcast very recently as well, and we had a really fun discussion about House of a Thousand Corpses, which is has turned out to be one of our most successful episodes as well. So please go check out all of that. This is episode number 80 of Pod of the Damned, and in today's show we're talking about the 2016 movie Don't Breathe. Now, when I was For those who maybe are unfamiliar with the live episodes that we do here on our Twitch channel, you'll know that and if you're currently in the chat, you'll be able to see that we have, a few images of the movie, on our sort of rotating to give you guys a bit of an idea of and a bit of a reminder about some of the characters and what happens in the movie. And I had a bit of a dilemma when I was prepping for this episode about which images I could and could not sort of pick. Now, normally I tend to stay away from anything that's like super gory and anything like that, just, to keep myself safe on Twitch. I don't want to get banned from Twitch. But I have got a turkey baster in one of the one of the images. That's it's the dripping moment, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. So for all of you guys that are currently watching along, you are welcome. just for having to witness that about 70 or 80 times as it rotates around through this week's episode. So yeah.
How appropriate. Just never eat before you listen or watch any of Ian's promos.
Absolutely not. Especially, even just the promo clips that we put out on our socials, because I usually pick the worst possible thing. Some people, when they're promoting their podcast, they put out things that are particularly interesting, or they put out things that, that like interesting facts or are particularly funny. No, I just pick whatever's most embarrassing for Nico usually and just chuck that out there. But unfortunately, I can't do that. So this week, I might actually put out something funny or interesting because, I haven't got Nico here to embarrass, but... With that being said, Boomer, shall we just get straight into it?
Let's do this.
Let's do this. Okay, we are talking all about Don't Breathe. This movie was released in 2016, was written by Fede Alvarez and Rodo Sayaguez. That's probably been butchered. It was directed by Fede Alvarez and stars Stephen Lang, Jane Levy, and Dylan Minnette. The IMDb plot is as follows. Hoping to walk away with a massive fortune, a trio of thieves break into the house of a blind man who isn't as helpless as he seems. That is probably the understatement of the century, to be honest. Now, Boomer, I know you have some feelings about this movie, and I've got a feeling, we might actually disagree quite vehemently as this sort of episode goes on. But I gave you the choice of a couple of movies to pick from, and you were initially a little reluctant to pick Don't Breathe. Your other option was either this or Insidious, I believe I said for you to choose from. What made you decide to come on to talk about Don't Breathe?
All right. So honestly, from our conversations, I believe you're going to be a little bit surprised on where I come down on this movie as a whole. And I'm kind of giving away, putting the cart before the horse, as they say. But there are certain things in this movie there that just really, really piss me off. So yeah, when I was trying to decide between the two, I'm like, God, I really don't want to watch Don't Breathe again, but I am kind of like a little bit meh on Insidious. And here we go. Like, I am already starting the show off really, really hot. It's son of a bitch. No. But the more that I thought about it in the 2 seconds, and I can never make up my mind on anything, I was like, you know what? There are things in Don't Breathe that I'm a lot more passionate about than I am in Insidious. So let's fucking do this. Let's let the cat out of the bag and let's fuck this movie up just a little bit before I do build it back up, because there are things in this film that I really, really enjoy. I think that it does some amazing things with the use of sound and light and camera work and all kinds of stuff. And I'm a fucking stan for Stephen Lang. I love Stephen Lang, particularly VFW. Shout that movie out. If you had not seen VFW, that is one fucking fun movie. So I love Stephen Lang. I think he's an incredible actor. But at the same time, this movie goes places that I don't feel are fucking necessary. And whenever a movie does that, and it's funny because I wanted to relate. I know I'm going to wrap this up. I know I'm talking a long time, but we talked on the last show that we were on about killing a child and killing a dog, right? And we all came to the conclusion that, you know what, it's okay to do those things if it's relevant and necessary for the story. And this film does shit that I don't feel is fucking necessary at all. I feel like it could have been handled a bunch better way than the way that it did. But we're going to get into that, I assume. So that's my initial take.
Well, you say we're going to get into that. We are going to get into that, because I don't think we can start off any discussion about Don't Breathe without talking about that scene first. You know, and that twist and that reveal. Because for the majority of this movie, we just think that this is a relatively... I wouldn't say bog standard, because it's, I think, like, I agree with you, there's so much that to like about this movie, but a relatively bog standard home invasion movie with a twist that's, you know, we've got the Stephen Lang playing the blind man, and, you know, we've got, like you say, all those good aspects, and then, you know, with not very long of the movie left to go, we get hit with this piece of information that just changes everything. And from doing my research and sort of looking into what everyone else sort of thinks about it, I think that it wasn't a particularly well received twist. And you know, going back to what you're saying, we got into that discussion when you were on the podcast last week, Abby, about, you know, is it okay to kill kids and dogs? And we all sort of fell down on the side of yes, if it's, you know, warranted and it fits the story and it fits the purpose. And here, you know, we've got this story. So Stephen Lang is an army veteran. His daughter was killed. Was it a hit and run his daughter was killed in?
It was, I don't think they were real clear on that. It was, I don't know if it was a hit and run or whether it was just an accident. And the rich girl got off.
Yeah, there was something transpired in which his daughter was killed by this woman who essentially got off with it. And then he decided to kidnap her, keep her locked up in his basement, and impregnate her so that he could... So basically, his even as I'm saying it, I'm like, I just feel icky kind of saying it. He basically decided that since she took his daughter away from him, that she should provide him with another one. Is essentially how that twist goes. Now... we've talked about, and we've covered on this show and in previous shows and things like that, we've talked about sort of rape revenge movies, you know, and like things like Revenge, you know, is, you know,
which I made you watch,
which you may, but we agree is a really, you know, well constructed movie. It deals with the subject matter pretty well, you know, in what I would say is sort of the correct way. The subject matter here, though, I mean, what was going through your head when you first watched this, and on previous and watches since then? What goes through your head when that's happening on your screen?
Okay, so they go into the basement and they find this girl. Yeah, let's just rip the Band-Aid off and put the turkey baster in the hoo-ha. Let's get this rolling. So they go down to the basement and they find this captured person. And again, like, felt like they could have done this movie so much better. And the way that I would have done it, I would have appreciated it being done, is this is an ambiguous thriller movie, not like in the way that it's written, but it could have been. So they could have easily made Stephen Lang's blind man a reprehensible character without the laziness of this writing, to where, and I'm going to be as PC as I can for Twitch purposes. So Stephen Lang is a big grapist. He claims that he doesn't like grapes, but at the same time, you know, that's what it is. And what's even worse, and we're not going to get into that movie, is they try to turn him into a hero in part 2 of this, which I just didn't even watch. I'm like, nope, I can't do it. That makes absolutely no sense. But as soon as I saw her down there, I knew it was coming, and not maybe in the vehicle. I didn't understand exactly what was the whole picture, of course, but I knew what they were doing, and I wasn't fucking happy about it. I'm like, oh my God. You know, I was on board for this film, and I was really enjoying it and expecting some type of twist. I mean, we see in the very first scene where he is dragging a girl down the street who is bleeding, and I'm like, great, okay. You got these characters that we don't particularly like because they're kind of assholes and they're taking advantage of people and all this stuff, even if it's for a good cause and all this stuff. So we can't really get on board with them, but we can't get on board with Stephen Lang. And there's this battle of, you know, who do we root for? And I enjoy that. But as soon as it's like they're fucking just shoving that shit in our face, like, nope, you have to get on board with these people because he's such a fucking dick. And that's I at that point I was almost checked out of the film. It almost completely just ruined the entire thing for me.
It's so bizarre. You've just touched on so many of my points that I have for this. It was fantastic because I can segue into so many different points. First off, I'm going to take with you. I have unfortunately watched the sequel, and it's just as bad as you think it's going to be. So I do not recommend anyone checking out that movie because the fact they think you're absolutely right. You know, they do try and make him the sort of hero of the piece, and it's just, after watching this movie, I just don't understand how, you know, you could, you know, go into that movie and think, right, let's go and make this guy a hero. But
Let's cheer for this guy.
It's so bizarre, this movie, because I really, I'm gonna just say it right. Overall, I really like this movie. If you just change a couple of things, I think you've got a really great movie. And one of the things I think, you know, you're right, we have so many unlikable characters, and even the characters we're supposed to be rooting for, even Jane Levy in this movie, who, and we'll get in, what would be an episode with us on Boomer without a bit of Evil Dead talk. I'm sure we'll have a little bit of Evil Dead talk in just a little bit, but, you know, Jane Levy, who is someone who I know we're both fans of in terms of the horror genre. You know, we've got Fede Alvarez as well with that link there, but she's really the character that we're supposed to be rooting for. You know, she's the one who we get that backstory from, of, you know, she's coming from a troubled home, she's trying to get her and her sister away from, you know, her mother and this what we are probably led to believe is her abusive partner, and they're planning on trying to take her away to the other side of the country to go and live like happy lives. And in order to do that, she's robbing these homes. So they're trying to give her some sort of justification for her, you know, heinous acts here. You know, they're robbing people up until, you know, they don't really know at this point that Stephen Lang is this reprehensible character. They just think he's some recluse army veteran who, you know, lost his sight in a war, and, you know, they're planning on taking advantage of that because they believe he's got a lot of money in his house. So there really is sort of no redemption for me for any of these characters. Yes, okay, maybe the character, Jane Levy's character, and I'll just let me say, our two of our three main characters here are called Money and Rocky. I mean, when they were handing out names of their characters, I don't really know what was going through Fede Alvarez's head for this one, but, you know, that's by the by. And then you've got Money, who is possibly the most reprehensible of the three of them. But even Alex, who's sort of playing this, you know, friend-zoned kind of guy, just sort of, he feels creepy to me, and just gross, you know, gross. Like, he's hanging out, and listen, I'm sure everybody at some point in their lives, from teenagers and adulthood, have been friend zoned by someone who they're into, you know, and it's not a particularly nice feeling. But these people who, you know, just sort of carry on essentially trying to be the hero of this of the person who they're into, who clearly isn't into them in the straight way, it's just creepy and gross. You know, move on. You know, we're adults, we have the capability of moving on. So even then, Alex, who's and Rocky, who are probably supposed to be the two more relatable characters. I don't know if relatable is maybe the right word or not. Even they're not very likable at all, and we're really then just going off the fact of, oh well, they're less likable than this blind army veteran who, for the majority of the movie, we just kind of believe to be this victim. I know we get that scene in the opening. I think it would have actually been better if we didn't get that scene in the opening where we see him sort of dragging dragging Jane Levy's character through the road, because I would have preferred us going the majority of the way through this movie just thinking that he's this, you know, kind of recluse shut-in who's been, you know, probably with some post-traumatic stress disorder and all of the issues that come with that, and then they're picking on him, and then having the hard-hitting twist. Now, I say hard-hitting twist, we could have still have him having kidnapped this woman, right? He could have still kidnapped this woman, but I just think they should have either made it been a case of it was just a revenge thing, you know, he took his daughter, so he kidnapped her and he was just, you know, torturing her or whatever. Like, I feel like that would have been fine.
Right.
Or they could have just left it ambiguously. You know, they could have had, even if they had the hints that these sorts of things were happening, I think it should have been left a little bit more ambiguous, because not only do they tell us this is the entire plot, is he is doing these things, he is replacing his daughter, but then we get the really graphic details of the scenes that come along with that. And by that I mean the turkey baster, that one pube that's in his sort of jar of semen, you know, getting that turkey baster shoved down his throat. We get all of that in extremely graphic detail. And in actual fact, and that was a creative choice, you know, when I was reading up on this movie, I found out that it was Fede, I talked about that one hair that was in the jar, that was deliberately put there by Fede Alvarez. He apparently cut it from the assistant director's head and put it there because he felt it added more realism. You know, so
Okay,
all of the sort of like really creative choices that they made that really, really takes away from the movie for me.
I thought you were going to say like Stephen Lang actually pulled that out of his pubes to put that on there.
That would have been real. That would have been adding realism to the movie.
The method actor that he is. Yeah, it's so gross. You get that as, I mean, it's basically like a finished penis with that one drop that's just dripping down. It's so gross.
Yeah,
It's so nasty.
For everyone who's watching this video, that image just came up on the screen right now.
Perfect timing. But you know, I could see the opening going either way. So I understand, like it's a greater reveal later if you don't show that, and it's maybe a better storytelling device that if you don't show that and we just journey with these characters, then we find out who he is. But at the same time, I kind of understand and I kind of appreciate it. So I didn't mind that because, and I'll give you a for instance. One of the movies that is really universally, I think, loved is The Strangers. And one of the things that completely ruined that movie for me was that opening text where it says, you know, basically, and I forget what exactly it says, but basically these characters are dead and we don't really know what happened. So all the tension of that movie, and I understand that there are scary parts, there's things that are done well in that, but all the tension of that movie just completely left from the opening text crawl because I knew that they were dead. And so you kind of see this image, and so it turns it on its head. That's not really the ending that we get in this movie. And so I kind of appreciate that in a way. It really kind of messed with my expectations. So I could see it both ways. I really didn't mind that one. And you know, you kind of touched on, we touched on the characters and how terrible, how just awful each one of them is. But yeah, Alex, who is supposed to be the nice guy, is just weird and creepy. But even and Rocky is not only the way that she is, but she's also extremely manipulative. Like when Alex is like, you know what, I don't want to do this, she's like, come on.
Yeah.
And you know, and using her attraction, she knows that he is attracted to her, cares about her in some weird way, and is using that to get him on board to do this. And so everything about this is just gross. And then they find out that this guy is not only an army vet. I mean, they're like, oh man, this dude's daughter, yeah, she just completely got ran over, and it's fucking great because now he's got all this money that we're going to go rob from him. And then they find out he's blind, and that no hesitation whatsoever. It's not like they don't take a moment to say, man, this guy has had some terrible stuff happen to him.
I mean,
maybe we should go find a different Mark.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's one line in this movie where I think it's Rocky that says, oh, this is a bit fucked up. And it's just such a throwaway line that none of them even sort of pay any creed to it, and they're just like, oh, this is fucked up, but we're gonna do it anyway. So,
Yeah.
it's just, yeah. Yeah,
It's like asshole buddies that are sitting around with their friends and they're like about to tell the story, like, man, this story is really fucked up, but listen to this, so
yeah,
no hesitation.
yeah. And as you say, like, we've got this character of Alex who is supposed to be the nice guy, and I think, if history has told us anything, that's not, quite often you really need to be careful of the nice guy,
Oh yeah.
if history has taught us anything. And we've got Money. I can't believe I'm actually calling someone Money, but we've got the character of Money, and I don't feel bad for Money, right? Because Money is an absolute arsehole. But this is it, like, him and Rocky are together, and this guy Alex is sniffing about, and I think I would be a little bit like, whoa, you back up a little bit there, buddy. It's just the dynamic of the whole thing is so bizarre because we are supposed to be rooting for these characters, and there's just nothing to actually root for between any of the three of them. They try, like I said, they try to give us this like redemption arc for Rocky with her family situation, but realistically, are the means justifying the ends for her? Not really. I understand that she wants to get out of her situation as quickly as possible, but this, that's no real way of justifying committing felony crimes.
Right.
So.
It doesn't help also that they like found one of the worst child actors ever to play the younger sister. It's just like, I want to go to the beach. Okay, well, there is no beach in Detroit, but there is in California. Do you want to go? Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, it's thankfully she's only in that that one scene, because I think if we'd gotten any more of her, that would have I think I might have turned the movie off, to be honest. It's just not something I ever do particularly often. I mean, since we're ripping this movie apart to begin with, so I feel like we should maybe continue in that manner, and then maybe we'll build it back up, like you said, as we go on. So I have an issue, right, with the blind man. Right now, obviously, it's partially myth, probably partially true as well, that if you lose one of your senses, your other senses become a little bit more attuned and a little bit stronger, just because you require them that much more to get around. And obviously in this movie we're led to believe that the blind man has a particularly strong sense of smell. Apparently comes along with that a bit of a foot fetish, but I just find it really, like, they handle things so bizarrely. Like, this guy is supposed to have this really strong sense of smell. He can smell her shoes from across the room and go and find them and be like, there's someone else in this house. But he walks right past Alex at one point and doesn't even notice that he's there.
Yeah, and they're sweating their ass off at this point. They're scared. They've been climbing in windows and running around, and and for a fact that she put on some nice smelling lotion at some point as well. So yeah, that just makes no sense.
You're also not telling me that Money doesn't wear some really bad, cheap, strong cologne that's absolutely stinking out the whole house. It's yeah, it's just a bit of a plot hole that has always bugged me about this movie. It's just like, for me, it's just, that's one of the laziest things for me. Is that's such an easy thing to notice. It doesn't take someone with a film degree to pick up that that's not quite right, and that's when I really hate when those things happen. And Fede Alvarez is better than that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. And I you just look at Money and know that he like bathes in like the poor man's nice cologne Tommy Hilfiger. So yeah, it makes no sense how they couldn't find it. Something else that doesn't make sense in this, like, and here we go, let's pick this apart. The line when they're planning for this, and they're like, there's at least 300,000. Now, they didn't know that there were millions or whatever it is, but they're saying like roughly, they're thinking hundreds of thousands. So somewhere around, let's say 300,000 to 500,000 on a good day. Their fencer, they already said, man, that fencer is going to shit their pants when we come back with all this money. So he's getting his take, and then they have to split it three ways. And Rocky's like, if we do this job, we'll never have to do another one again. I mean, what? Like $330,000 to $50,000 basically is probably what you're looking at, and that's going to carry you for the rest of your life.
Well, we already know that the guy takes 40% as well. You know, in that scene in the open, when they do that house in the beginning, and you know because they don't. That's their whole thing, is they don't steal money, they steal possessions because it's a lesser crime. You know, which it's one of those aspects I actually quite like, is it kind of shows a little bit of intelligence on the characters' part. You know, they talk about, well, we don't take money, you know, we don't bring guns, we don't, and then once we find out that there is a lot more money, you know, they didn't, like, Alex brings up the fact that they don't want to take over 10,000 because then it becomes you know, all of these things is really smart. That's smart. But yeah, like you say, they take 40%. So even if it is the 300k initially that they believe there to be, you know, you're talking maybe what, 170,000 after their fee has been taken off, and then, like you say, split three ways. So yeah, okay, don't get me wrong, I would quite like to have an extra 50 grand in my bank account right now, but that 50 grand's not going to set me up for life. And you know, if Rocky wants to take her sister all the way across the other side of the country to start a new life, you know, they're maybe going to need a bit more than 50 grand to get themselves sorted out. You know, that it just seems to be this weird thing that people can just up sticks and just go wherever they want with no money. You know, it's fine. You know, we'll work something out. No, that's not how life works. You know.
No. Especially if you're taking care of a child now. In California, I've got news for you. California is expensive as hell. That 50 grand is going to last you like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah. Geek Out Corner in the chat says, but musty is musty, especially if you've been running around. Also, adrenaline can cut off smell in some cases. So, you know, listen, it's just one of those things that I think, you know, if the adrenaline is running for these characters all throughout the movie, you know, and he can still sniff her shoes from the other side of the bloody kitchen or wherever it is, he can't. But it's not only that, like, if you're walking past someone, it's not even just a smell thing, you know, the air is different, you feel that air sort of hitting back at you, you know, you can sense, you know, people can sense when there is someone close by, when they've just walked past someone. So for me, that was a particular moment that just stood out to me. But yeah,
especially since he turns into like Daredevil at a certain point in this movie.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think I would like to take this guy on in a fight. But one of the things that really sort of interests me as well about this movie, you know, when we're talking about villains of horror movies, you know, and you know, I think those sort of big slasher movies is you know, a good thing to compare to. I know obviously we're talking about a slightly different subgenre here, but you know, the villains, you know, are Michael Myerses, are Jasons, you know, these are all guys who have got superhuman strength, superhuman senses, you know, they're so incredible, they're so powerful, they're relentless, right? Here's a guy who cannot see, right? He is completely blind. Yes, he is an army veteran, he's well trained, he's very strong physically, but there is nothing about him that is superhuman. And it's also one of the things that really, it makes me feel like our heroes, and I am using air quotes for heroes because I don't feel like there is a hero in this movie, our heroes, it makes them, to me, feel much less than. Because here's this guy with this massive disability, this massive impediment that affects how he lives his entire life. And yes, obviously, you know, he's made adjustments to his house, you know, he's in familiar surroundings, but you're not telling me that he's still able to get around there better than these 3 people. Like that to me, it doesn't really wash with me.
I mean, maybe in the dark that makes sense because yes, you're familiar with your own surroundings, and so they're not. So in the dark, they're going to be stumbling into things and all that, and you're going to be picking up on the sounds, and you kind of know where everything is. So I get that portion, but the vast majority of the movie is not spent in the dark, and in particular, that first struggle with money, where I mean they battle for the gun and hesitate for like a good 2 minutes, and those that are listening to this on the pod can't see what I'm doing, but those live can. But for like a good 2 minutes, they're struggling over the gun. And then Rocky is just over in the corner like, like, bitch, do something. Hit him in the head.
Yeah. it would have been like this movie could have been over in 10 minutes, you know, and they could have literally the only thing they wouldn't have gotten away with if that had happened is the money, because they wouldn't have gotten the actual codes to the safe. You know, but it is like it's just such a drawback. Rocky really could have, you know, just intervened at that point, and between the two of them, right there, right then, could have incapacitated this guy. You know, these are the things that really just hold this movie back for me. You know, and this is the situation multiple times. This happens multiple times throughout the movie where Stephen Lang, the blind man, is targeting one of these three, and the other one is just standing right, you know, sort of right next to him, you know, and not really doing anything. Now, I understand that a little bit more towards the end of the movie when he has got the gun, because, you know, he's hearing noises and he's just literally shooting at noises that he hears. I get that a little bit more. But there's so many times in this movie where that's not the case, and they could realistically just incapacitate him, and, you know, he would never be able to sort of fight back. It's a little bit poor for me.
Yeah, and another thing that still confounds me to this day. I've seen this movie 4 times now. I've watched it twice more, or 3 more times. I'm sorry, for this viewing. I saw it initially and then watched it 3 more times. And I rewound the scene and kept watching it. And I'm trying to figure out how this actually happened. So they trap themselves in the bedroom and they're like, we're trapped. No way out of here. And Rocky gets away in the air duct, and then the dog gets in and just knocks Alex out the window as easy as can be. Like, he just basically like just leans against the window and gets out of the house. So, and I don't know, I'm rewinding. I don't know if we ever get really a clear shot of what that window actually was, but they never try to do anything. And if something is that flimsy, you'd think you'd see that and like, okay, we can get out of here. So that was just a huge plot hole for me.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. Like these characters actually realistically escape out the house relatively easily. You know, and there's multiple ways of them to actually be able to do that. You know, and if they had just incapacitated the blind man in the beginning, as they should have, they would have easily managed to escape from this house, even if, you know, all of these locks were on and the windows were all barred. Like you say, you know, we spend such a big portion of this movie with these characters being unable to break out of the house, and then Alex just very easily falls out the window, and it almost feels like you know, I almost as a viewer feel slightly cheated, because everything I've just been told up until this point about, you know, we can't escape, we can only get out through the basement, or, you know, we need to get the keys to the door, is completely thrown out, pun intended, completely thrown out the window, because he is literally just thrown out the window, you know. So yeah, I find that, like, this is the thing, you know. And to everyone listening, I promise I will get into some positives soon, because there are positives to this movie, but there is a lot of drawbacks to this movie. So and that for me is definitely one of them. You're right, it's not something that's it's ever really. And also as well, you know, Alex goes through the vents and gets knocked out, but the dog doesn't actually then chase her any further. So, you know,
I think it's a. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, she sort of falls in this sort of crawl space, I'm assuming, between two rooms, and then, you know, she gets herself knocked out, and then we go back to Alex and sort of his predicament, and then she just wakes up and then manages to sort of get herself out of the walls. Now, I'm not really sure. Like, our buildings aren't really built like that over here, I don't think so. I'm not overly familiar with how, you know, crawl spaces and that work with houses, especially, you know, over in the States. But to me, shouldn't the dog just have continued to go after her and then essentially attack and kill her?
I've never really crawled through the vents either. So even living here, I've never had a reason to. But what I took from that is, like, it was kind of straight down almost, and so the dog didn't want it was kind of like, you know, the edge of the cliff moment, so the dog didn't want to go after her. So I mean, that didn't bother me that the dog didn't go after her, but what bothered me is she didn't snap her neck. I mean, she landed head first.
And it does seem like quite a fall, you know. She falls very heavily, so or not even just snap her neck, just snap anything, you know. She comes out of there and she's essentially uninjured, you know. I can't even, like, if I was to fall like off one step, I think I would probably break my back or something, you know, and she falls down essentially the height of an entire 2-story building. And manages to come out fine. It's you know, we have to suspend our disbelief sometimes for movies, but sometimes movies just ask us to do that a little bit too much.
It is that Home Alone logic. Yeah.
It is, yeah. Geek in the chat also says, actually, blind people are better making themselves around their houses because of muscle memory. The only reason I know is because I knew a blind person. I swear he was crazy all over his house. Now, mind you, that's only his house. Other than that, it's like a normal blind guy. Well, that's what we're saying. We're not saying that, you know, he's not great at getting around his house. And obviously, clearly in this movie, the blind man is excellent at getting around his house. But you're not telling me that 3 people who have full sight, full vision, cannot... I don't want to say outsmart, because that makes it sound like I'm saying the blind man is dumb for being blind. That's not what I'm saying. But you essentially outsmart him and, you know, lead him away or trap him or incapacitate him. So you're not telling me that 3 fully grown adults who do not have a visual impairment cannot maneuver themselves in a way that means they can get out of there okay. You know, for me, that's the big thing about this movie. You know, we can talk about, you know, the misogyny, and we can talk about the, you know, whether or not it's right to include that kind of plot twist in those scenes that we've already talked about. But in terms of, you know, if you're boiling this down to just purely an ability standpoint, I'm not buying that these 3 characters are so easily sort of bullied and beaten and then, you know, ultimately killed by this blind man. So there we go. Right. Shall we talk maybe about a couple of positives? Unless do you have anything else that, you know, in terms of drawbacks to this movie? Anything you want to add to anything that we've already mentioned?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not done talking shit. You know, I'm gonna pull an Ian for Scream 6.
I did have I very much. If you haven't checked that episode, go check out, because I very much have my hold my beer moment. Because Boomer and Gabby are desperately trying to move this episode along, and I'm just like, no, hold on a second, I'm not done.
Yeah, just 2 more like real quick things just to touch on. So the first one that I thought was kind of funny is like the captured girl comes with like her own backstory. Like she's holding the newspaper clipping of the story, which I thought was like weird. Like, did he just give that to her as like, oh, you better think about what you did? Or, you know, is that just some random thing for us as the audience, you know? And the final thing is like at the end, Stephen Lang is doing we talked about like the big heavy hitters. I mean, he's doing his best, like Jason Voorhees impression. It's like he's knocked out. No, he comes back. Okay, now he's tied up now. No, he's coming back. Oh, here comes the dog. Well, here's Stephen Lang again. Oh no, he's dead. No, he shoots the guy. You know, it's just like this same beat like over and over again at the end of this film. Like that third act, even though like I said, I kind of appreciated the way the direction in it, the way that they executed that was just really bizarre at times.
Yeah, there's so much bizarreness around this movie. I mean, could this movie have any more sort of false finishes? I don't think have we ever seen a movie that has got as many false finishes as this. And I'm probably going to piss a lot of animal lovers out there off, and you know, I'm a person who love animals. I fucking hate this dog so much in this movie, because it's just it's one of the things, because it's very easily, you know, a drawback, but it's also, I think, one of the positives of this movie. It kind of falls on both sides for me, because at times, you know, our villains are Stephen Lang and his dog. They are relentless in this movie, and that definitely helps add to the levels of tension that we feel, the sort of overall claustrophobia of the movie, you know, everything else that goes along with that. However, you know, there is also just this sense, you know, they get the better of him in the basement and they manage to handcuff him, and then he gets free, you know, and then, you know, she manages to escape out of the house, and you think, okay, that's it over, because how's he going to get her outside? But then the dog comes into play, and then it's a case of, right, she's gotten into the car, and then she's being tormented by the dog in the car. Right, okay, she's managed to trap the dog and has escaped from the car. Then he manages to get her again and drag her back to the house, and then, you know, she manages to escape. You know, there is a point in this movie where you're just like, come on, right? One of these has to just be it, you know? And I'm all for twists and turns and, you know, red herrings and things like that. But for me, there's just like one too many in this movie. Like, just, you know, I think we could have just had, you know, if she'd escaped from the car from the dog and gotten away, right, fine, let's just have that be, you know, or take one of the other ones out, you know, there's just a one too many of those for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, we even get Alex that just comes back for no reason. I don't get
Well,
that. I
that's
don't
it. You know,
understand.
you know, we have that red herring halfway through but he gets killed with a pair of garden shears, and then you know that turns out to not be the case because that's the thing as well. You know, and you know, and I am someone who is visually impaired. For you know, I'm half blind, so for people who are unaware, um, you know, and there does feel like there is a touch of insensitivity around blindness in this movie. You know, from the picture of his daughter being upside down on the sort of sill, and then you know him missing him and stabbing. You know, there's just like, did these moments really need to be in here? You've told us he's blind. You don't need to then, you know, have upside down pictures and you know stuff like that. You know what I mean? It's just like it
Yeah.
feels like they're really sort of taking it over, really going OTT. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here saying that that offends me as someone who has a visual impairment. In fact, I actually find it kind of funny, but I do kind of find it funny in a slightly cringe way.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Okay, I'm done. I'm done. No more negatives. I'm good.
You know what? Maybe I'm not done. No, I'm joking. um, yes. Okay. Right. Let's talk about some of the things we really like about this movie. All things said and done, this movie is incredibly tense. The tension of this movie, like, you know, throughout, from as soon as they break into his house, is for me really incredible. And it's so, because it's so contained within that house, the claustrophobia that it invoked, especially, you know, later on when you get down to the basement and then that scene in the dark, you know, I think the sort of the way that that's shot and done, I think is really excellent. The camera work and the overall atmosphere of this movie is really, really quite something.
Oh, it really, yeah, it really is one of the most unique and intense scenes that I've seen. And I get that it's you can kind of look towards Silence of the Lambs a little bit in this, but it's not done the same way. So this is still its own thing, and I don't want anybody to misconstrue that. But whenever she's walking down that space in between the shelves, and then the blind man just appears out of the dark, not like he just shows up, like he's standing there, but the camera just reveals him, and like is getting closer and closer and almost touches him when Alex makes the sound is phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like I was getting like goosebumps, like, oh God, what's gonna happen? So I mean, there are several things in this movie that just ratchet up the tension to such a degree that you kind of forget that moral ambiguity with our main characters, and so it's so good at doing those things and heightening that suspense that you are just like literally in that moment. Like it's almost like you're traveling with her, like right behind her. You're like, don't stop. It's amazing.
Well, one of the things I actually really love about that moment as well is, you know, like you mentioned that sort of scene in Silence of the Lambs, and you know, one of the things that happens when a scene like that is that, you know, one of the characters can see. That's the point. You know, in that scene in Silence of the Lamb, Buffalo Bill, he's wearing his night vision goggles. He can see.
Right.
One of the great things I think about this scene is that us as the viewer, we're the only ones that actually know what's potentially about to happen because, you know, Rocky, she can't see what's going on in the dark. Equally, you know, the blind man cannot see what's going on. Neither of them actually know how close they are to each other. And that to me is something that's really quite interesting as well, because that's not really something that happens very often, where neither your hero or your villain actually know how close they are to, you know, to one another. There's always sort of one in the know. So what this movie actually does is it takes that sort of responsibility of knowing what's about to happen and it places it firmly with the viewer.
Yeah. I mean, exactly like, and there's times that like that doesn't work when like things are done strictly for the audience. But in this one, yeah, it's very much intentional. It's in the like the storytelling and all that is fantastic, and something like again like what it plays with it plays with your expectations in some of those suspense moments like again, it's weird that Alex was able to find the right key on that basement door, like the very first one in that ring of keys. But still, it
It
works
could
really well
happen.
to where it's right. He's very lucky. So that's not out of the realm of possibility. So sure, that's fine. We'll go with this one. But they keep flashing back to the door, and the last thing you've seen is the blind man standing at the top of the ladder, and you feel like he's coming down there at any moment. He's gonna like bust through and start shooting or whatever and fuck him up. And so your heart is racing, and then they open it and you're like, oh my goodness, wow, okay. And then he's standing at the top of the stairs outside of the house. Fucking great. I love like not only how it uses the tension, but it turns some of those beats like on their heads in this one.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just it's really frustrating. It really frustrates me about this movie because it, in spite of everything, I really want to like this movie, and I don't know if that's maybe also down to the fact of the people involved. You know, we've kind of briefly touched upon. You know, we've got Fede Alvarez as our writer and our director, who has directed what, in my opinion, is the greatest Evil Dead movie of all time. We've got Jane Levy in here who plays the lead character in said movie, and I will stick by that. I think we reached the point where we have our little Evil Dead discussion. Just to remind everyone how you feel about the 2013 Evil Dead remake.
Yeah, I'm not that far off from where you are. The Evil Dead 2013 is my second favorite in the franchise. So even though that I grew up with that original trilogy and I watched them all back in the day, and Evil Dead 2 is of course always my favorite, always will be. But 2013 does so much good stuff. And so speaking of Fede Alvarez really knows how to capture violence on screen, and that's something. So this is obviously not Evil Dead 2013, which is fantastic and unique in its own way. But there are some similarities in here. So that, of course, that's Deadites and it's over the top and crazy. Whereas this is very grounded, but you still get that ultra violence, whether it's like he's just beating the shit out of Rocky or Alex or something like that, to where he flips that gun and in slow motion just blasts money in the face. And so like the violence in this movie is really really visceral and on point for Fede Alvarez, which makes me on another point like really interested to see what he does with this new Alien movie.
Yes, yes. It's obviously Alien Romulus that's going to be coming out. There's not a huge amount, I think, known about it at the moment in terms of plot points and casting and things like that, but it does make me really interesting. It's a much more visceral experience you have here, and it was a conscious effort of him when he was writing this movie. I think he wanted to do something that was really different from Evil Dead. Fede Alvarez as a director is someone who's especially amongst sort of the horror fandom, has gone on to become quite well liked, to be honest, I think, as an overall director. But he actually doesn't have a huge amount of credits to his name at the minute. And I was sort of looking through it. We're talking Evil Dead, we're talking this movie. He did, write part of the second movie as well, but he didn't direct it. He did the From Dusk Till Dawn TV series. I'm not sure if you're super familiar with that. And obviously
I've heard it was good. I haven't seen it.
I've heard it was decent. I've not watched it yet either. And he's obviously got the new Alien movie coming up. So there's something about him that sort of, that studios as well have complete faith in him to take these massive properties, these massive intellectual properties. Alien is one of the biggest intellectual properties there is in terms of horror, out there. And it's not even horror if you go further, sci-fi, and it's out there. It's on the Disney now, Disney. owning the intellectual property for it. And then in terms of horror, pure horror franchises, Evil Dead is one of the biggest and probably most loved. I think the only one that's probably loved more is Scream, and I think that's absolutely insane because I don't think that franchise deserves to be loved more than the Evil Dead one. But that's a discussion for a different episode. So he's someone that clearly knows what he's doing. He knows how to build horror, and he knows how to do it in a variety of different manners and settings. Evil Dead 2013 is a vastly different movie to this one. Both. Even though it's a much more serious Evil Dead movie and this is a very serious movie, tonally the two movies are still very different. They're still, that is still quintessentially an Evil Dead movie in terms of how mean and horrible, but also still how fantastical. I think back to that big finale scene, with the abomination, with the blood raining down. There's nothing like that in this movie in Don't Breathe. But what we do have is, and one of the moments I think that really sort of hits it for me is when the blind man is fighting Alex in the utility room or whatever it is, and he is just punching him in the face, and through the screen you can almost feel every single one of those punches landing. There's no big massive sound effects going on. It's just literally him and pure strength just absolutely caving this guy's face in.
Yeah, I mean it's uncomfortable in a like a really, really good way. And yeah, I mean, whether it's that, his use of the violence in this to make you feel on edge and uncomfortable, or just some of the shots in it when it's in the dark and there's the close up of the blind man's face and he looks like almost alien or something. He just looks off, and it's a really, really striking image. So it's his direction in this is fantastic. Writing maybe not as much, but at least the direction in this is absolutely incredible. But yeah, the best part of this movie is Stephen Lang. I mean, I believe Stephen Lang is like a scary dude. Like if I think he's got to be like 70, and he looks amazing.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. I think he is about there. I'm trying to quickly look up. He is currently, yeah, he's 71 now, so he'll have been, just maybe early 60s when this was coming out, so maybe 61, 62, around the time that this movie was coming out. So, even when this movie was released, he's still a guy who, is maybe on the slightly later end of, maybe going into his sort of twilight years, maybe as an acting career. And here we are, a decade later, he's in his 70s. He is a scary fucking dude. I don't know if it's a case of, they're relying on, what we know about the character combined with, that sort of that old man strength that people get, that guys get when they reach a certain age. But he's not someone like in this movie that you really want to fuck with. However, he's probably one of the most he's such a well liked individual, in real life. He's a very, very, very well respected, actor, and he's been in a number of huge movies. Doesn't really matter how you feel about it, but Avatar is, one of the most profitable franchises of all time. He's obviously here for horror people. He's got the Don't Breathe franchise. You've already mentioned VFW, which I agree with you is such a great fun movie that everyone should go check out. I really need to, get that added to the schedule at some point. I've been meaning to add that for some time. So you see someone is, and that's just, just picking up on a couple. This guy's had a really quite illustrious career, and I don't think I've ever heard a story of him really pissing people off or being difficult to work with. It just seems like a relatively well liked guy all around, and then here he is just being an absolute beast and looking great and intimidating as fuck. And I'm a guy, I'm in my early 30s. I don't think I'd want to go up against this guy.
No, I'm in agreement with that.
But then beyond that as well, I just want to, I will briefly bring up Jane Levy as well, because this is one of the things, we've talked about the characters and we've talked about how reprehensible they are. There's no one to root for, even the person who killed his daughter, you know, she killed his daughter. You know, she did something completely reprehensible in her life. You know, so even then, even though she's going through this really horrific thing, you know, she's still someone who is of low moral standing. You know, but what I will say is that all of these actors have performed their characters and fulfilled their roles incredibly well. This is a very well performed movie. You know, you know, in terms of that sort of nice guy, friend zoned person, I feel like Dylan Minnette, who plays Alex, does a really good job at sort of fulfilling that role, because that's exactly what it's like. You know, that nice guy who's hanging around the girl that you know, he ultimately is hoping to get with. It does have that creepy factor in real life. You know, so he plays that really well. Money, you know, is this asshole boyfriend who, you know, is trying to like show how big he is and try and be gangster, and you know, and he even says that in the movie, you know, when he pulls out the gun and he's just like, oh yeah, it's pure gangster or whatever. You know, it's in, you know, he plays that very well. And then you've got Jane Levy, who I think performs her role really well as this person coming from a troubled background and then is trying to do whatever it takes to get away. You know, the characters are the roles of the characters are all fulfilled very well by their actors. It's just a shame that they're all dickheads.
Yeah. No, yeah, I love, yes, Jane Levy. She's amazing. I can't believe like she has not picked up more roles. It's really weird. And I heard that there was like this falling out with her and Fede Alvarez, which makes me sad. But I think from the last thing that I heard, they've kind of patched that up a little bit. So I don't know what the whole story was or if that's exactly accurate, but I hate it when something like that happens. And yeah, I can't believe that she is not in more stuff. I can't believe she's not getting the Wednesday treatment. I don't know what her name is. And I know that the roles that she's chosen are not as, I mean, both of the things that she's chosen have been massive commercial successes as far as like in the horror genre, but not like to that universal appeal. So I get that there's a little bit of difference there, but it's just that's weird to me. And yeah, I mean, you talked about money, and he is like the unsung really good actor in this, like because nobody mentions him, but you're right, like he does this character that has like just this lack of self-awareness of who he really is and what his actual limitations are, and he does it brilliantly. Like it's seamless. Like you don't see this actor, you see this character that he's portraying. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe you're talking about Jenna Ortega, getting the Wednesday treatment. You know, and she's currently, you know, in pretty much everything that's going on. You know, and you're right. I think Jane Levy, you know, she really did have the potential, I think, to be up there with Jenna Ortega. And I think I'll throw someone who I know you're very fond of, Mia Goth, in there as well. You know,
yeah,
Mia Goth and Jenna Ortega are very much, they're the two. I don't even want to say rising stars anymore of horror, because especially Jenna, she's been in so much now. In such a short space of time, but Mia Goth as well. You know, even if you are just simply talking about the X franchise, which is bizarre because it came out last year and already there's a full fucking franchise of it. You know, it's just one of those most bizarre things. But you know, Mia Goth as well, and she really did have the ability, I think, Jane Levy, to go on and get that kind of treatment. Yeah, I think you're right. Her choices maybe slightly have held her back a little bit. She is also in the Castle Rock TV series. She played Jackie Torrance in that. And she is in the upcoming remake of A Toxic Avenger as well. I'm not sure.
I did see that. That made me excited. I'm really excited for that now.
Based on the fact that her role is cheerful insurance rep, I'm not sure how big her role in the movie is going to be, but I hope we get to see a little bit of her. But even just looking at I mean, I don't know if you've looked at the actual cast for that movie. The cast for that movie is absolutely stacked. You've got Jacob Tremblay, you've got Kevin Bacon, Elijah Wood, Peter Dinklage, you've got Jane Levy in there. You know, it's an absolutely stacked cast. So I'm very much excited to see what they're doing with that. But yeah, overall, you know, and it is one of the things, I think it is one of the things that also adds to this movie as well, is we have got this tiny cast of characters. You know, we have our three burglars, we've got Stephen Lang, and we've got the woman who killed his daughter. And essentially that's it. I know at the beginning, you know, you have like the dealer and the family, and at the end, you know, but they're really by the by. For the, you know, 4/5 of this movie, we are focused on these 5 people, and that is it.
Right. And I think that's a good thing, especially for this type of film. And I hate to use the word restraint in this movie, but I'm so happy that there wasn't just like some random mailman or something that showed up just for like an extra kill or two or something like that. That they really just focused on the dynamic between these characters. And so yes, I at least in this and in that aspect, I enjoy the restraint in it and get focus on each one of these, because you, even if you don't like them, you find out who they are, and they're pretty fleshed out and all that stuff. So I did enjoy that.
Yeah. Okay. I think I mean I've covered most of my points. I would just like to say, in terms of, we have kind of mentioned it. I think this movie is shot incredibly well. We've already kind of mentioned that with a couple of the scenes. The scene in the dark where Stephen Lang just sort of emerges. But there's some just like individual shots that are just incredible. Like you said, that moment where he's just sort of standing at his front door as Rocky escapes. But even earlier in the movie, when Money goes to sort of incapacitate him with the smoke bomb, whatever it is that he's going to set off in his room, and then the camera pans back, and he's just sitting up, because that's the other thing. There's so much done with nothing being said in this movie as well, because there's not a huge amount of dialogue in this, and to me that's such a smart decision as well, because that also helps ratchet up the tension, because we're not getting told anything, we're having to look at it with our own eyes. With that being said, is there anything else, any other positives, or anything you'd like to add to anything that we have already talked about?
No, actually, I think we did a pretty good job of covering just about everything in this.
Have we built it back up enough?
I think that we did okay. I think that
I think we did all right as well. Right, okay. Let us get into our next segment, and we will talk about some trivia. As always, we'll start off with the finances. According to IMDb, this movie had a budget of just under $10 million, so $9.9 million according to IMDb. Grossing worldwide $157.7 million. So no wonder there was a sequel. Well, I say a sequel, I think it's more of a prequel, but, no wonder there was a second movie. However, the less we say about the second movie, the better. But huge financial success, this movie. Again, 2016, a time where I think we were really, this is really where we were starting to come into this sort of golden era, because I think we're in the middle of a golden era of horror, and I think you agree with me on that. But I think 2016 is right at the beginning of that sort of era that we're in, so we're really talking about the last sort of 7-8 years. So maybe one of the movies that sort of really was part of that initial boom, I think, from the sort of early teens, where again there was maybe that little bit of malaise with horror. We had some good stuff coming out, but it was in the minority, in my opinion, of what was coming out at the time. And then, some sort of maybe slightly earlier, 2015, 2016 onwards, we're suddenly getting this boom of having multiple big hitter horror movies coming out, every single year. I immediately lost my place. That's always good. Stephen Lang wore contact lenses that greatly restricted his vision, particularly in the low light. So he was actually, kind of visually impaired for the majority of the movie. The other actors in this scene that we talked about that took place in the dark, they wore lenses as well that made them look like they had dilated pupils, but that also restricted their vision as well. So in that scene in the dark, none of the actors can actually see what's going on, which I think is a bit of a stroke of genius.
Yeah, it is, and it kind of makes me want to watch the outtakes, like if there are some, just to watch them.
Yeah,
bumping into things.
I can imagine they had an absolute blast with that. I find this interesting. So we've obviously talked about Evil Dead, but in contrast to his previous work on Evil Dead 2013, director Fede Alvarez decided that this movie would have less blood, an original storyline, more suspense, and no dependence on spooky supernatural elements, which he felt was currently overused. Which is fine, fair enough. He wants this to be a much more visceral thing, which to me then just makes this whole scene the scene, I'm just going to call it the scene, because I think if you've seen this movie, you know what we're talking about. That just makes that scene just stand out apart from it so much more, because he wants to have this much more sort of visceral, realistic storytelling, and then to then throw that in, it just makes it feel even more cheap, because it almost feels as if he hasn't therefore believed in everything that he's made up to that point, which is ridiculous because he's made a really fucking good horror movie up to that point.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really a really baffling choice in this, because this movie could have gone from, I mean, it made a lot of money. So more power to you. I mean, who am I to say? Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, maybe I'm wrong to me, but just in my opinion, I understand everybody has their own opinion, but it could have elevated. Oh God, I shouldn't have used that word. It could have it could have brought this movie up a little bit more if they didn't include that and made it such a tighter thriller than what it turned out to be.
But I think as well, it's maybe, it could call, listen, there's no denying that it has shock value, right? It absolutely has shock value. People were talking about it at the time, and I remember listening to podcasts that were talking about this movie when it was released, and people that I knew who'd seen this movie being like, "Oh my god, like this there's one scene in this movie that you kind of have to see," right? And it definitely had that sort of whole word of mouth thing going on. But the fact that it's so out of place, I think then went on to possibly harm the sequel as well. The sequel didn't even take a third of the amount of money that this movie took. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the sequel is nowhere near the quality of this movie as well, so that obviously plays a part in it as well. But I think that will have definitely turned a lot of people off from wanting to even go and check out the second movie, is the fact that there was this scene in the first one.
Oh yeah, definitely. And it was something else that stuck out to me from that, and it was like kind of funny to me, is that whoever wrote that piece of trivia had to highlight that this film was going to have less blood in it than Evil Dead 2013. Like, no shit.
Yeah, like I can't. Did Evil Dead Rise overtake it? Evil Dead was the holder, I think, for most fake blood used on a movie set of all time. I'm not sure if Evil Dead Rise has overtaken it or not, but I think that, like, for a, you don't need to say that your movie's gonna have less blood than Evil Dead 2013, because, if it had more blood, then fine, you can shout about that. But really, like, oh, it's that, yeah, that wild. A couple of slightly maybe more lighthearted things. The street where the blind man lives is called Buena Vista, which in Spanish means good view. So maybe just again, maybe just poking a little bit of fun at the fact that their main antagonist in this movie is blind. Originally, the movie was going to be called A Man in the Dark, which I believe is still the title for a lot of other countries, non-English speaking countries. Literally, I think that their translation for this movie is A Man in the Dark. So that would have been the name. The creators of this film, Fede Alvarez and the other writers, initially had an even darker ending in mind. So Rocky was not supposed to make it out of the house. Instead, the blind man locks her up in a cell, and even though the police come to investigate the burglary, they miss the door to her cell. But the writers thought that ending was too downbeat. So they changed it to Rocky escaping, but the blind man getting away with his crimes. The fact that, they thought that was too downbeat, but what we got was perfectly fine. It's just a little bit baffling to me.
Yeah, that was awful. That really would have taken away from this feel-good story.
Yeah. This movie is apparently potentially inspired by some real life events. Now, I do want to predicate this by saying that the impregnation aspect of the storyline and the sexual assault aspect of the storyline is not based on potential true events, but the actual whatever came before that potentially was. The real life killing of Haley Kiefer and Nicholas Brady in 2012. Kiefer and Brady broke into the home of Byron David Smith, a retired 64-year-old in Little Falls, Minnesota. Smith, armed with the gun, shot the teen separately as they entered his basement where he was hiding. He later stated to the police that he was worried about them being armed. After shooting them once, he repeatedly taunted them whilst they were injured and then shot them again until they were dead. He didn't report the crimes until the day after, keeping their corpses in his closet. And he was later found guilty of 2 counts of premeditated first-degree murder. So there is belief that the plot line to this, or the main thread of this, is loosely based on that. So, aside from that, that's what I have got for trivia for this. I don't feel like there's much else to really say. I certainly don't want to get into any sort of trivia around, what was in that jar. I hope they just decided, we'll just, use some milk or something. I really don't want to know. Is there anything else, trivia wise that you're aware of, or you would like to highlight, or shall we go on?
No, we could just go on because I never do research. So
that's fine. You're still more prepared than Nico is for these things. That's fine. We shall move on then to our final segment, which is the ratings and the reviews. As always, we'll start off with the critics' scores. IMDb has this movie rated as a 7.1 out of 10, which Metacritic also has this rated as a 7.1 out of 10, which for me is slightly surprising because Metacritic, especially in terms of rating movies, is usually pretty harsh with their ratings. You can fill Nico's shoes this week, Boomer. Rotten Tomatoes, what would you, or are you already aware of the Rotten Tomatoes scores?
no, I haven't looked.
Okay, what would you like to hazard a guess then at what the Rotten Tomatoes critics and the Rotten Tomatoes audience have scored this movie?
Okay, I'm gonna say that the audience is, and because of some of the camera work and some of the things that we kind of highlighted as good, I'm gonna say that the audience is going to be lower than the actual critics. So I'm going to say that the critics are a 78 and the audience would be a 65.
I mean, you're right. The audience did score this movie lower, and around about that sort of gap in between them. The scores, though, are actually slightly higher. So Rotten Tomatoes critics scored this 88% fresh.
Oh my God.
With
wow.
the Rotten Tomatoes audience scoring it 79%. So it was around that sort of 10 percentage point difference. But a little bit higher. Critics and everyone seemed like everyone really high on this movie. I will get into some people who are not so high on this movie in a little bit, but yeah, like they all seem to love it. Critics' consensus is Don't Breathe smartly twists its sturdy premise to offer a satisfyingly tense, chilling addition to the home invasion genre that's all the more effective for its simplicity. Now, that would be fine if it wasn't for that scene, because that would be absolutely correct. But that scene makes this simplicity irrelevant to the rest of this movie, because that is not a simple scene.
But, it's not a simple scene. It's not a simple ending. I don't. Yeah.
As always, we throw it out to you guys, our followers and our listeners. And unlike in mine and Nico's previous episode, which if you're watching this live hasn't been released yet, on Long Time Dead, because no one has seen that movie. You guys actually have scores and opinions for us. In that last episode, I actually had to do a poll of our, and you maybe saw it, of our followers on social media, just to see if anyone had actually seen that movie, because when I threw it out, there was just like no response, and I was like, oh god, are we just doing a movie that no one's even heard of? And it turned out, yeah, we were doing a movie that no one really heard of, so... but no, you guys actually have some thoughts and opinions. So Eric Courtney on Twitter says, I enjoyed it. Great horror concept and story, 8 out of 10. Our friends, the Horror Flicks and Guitar Picks podcast, Wren was on this show a couple of episodes ago. They give it a 6.5 out of 10. It's a fun and fresh idea, but when you start to dive into the logic behind the plot, it falls apart very quickly. Unpopular opinion, I prefer the sequel, even though it shares the same issues. I just think my expectations were way lower going into that one. There is maybe something to be said about that. It maybe was a much lower expectation going into the sequel, because even though I think in general it's not rated as high as this first one, I think it's rated higher than it deserves. Like, this movie's being rated highly. I still can understand why people really like this movie. I don't really get it so much with the sequel.
No.
So, yeah, 6.5 out of 10 for them. Tom Wilding gives that a 7.5. A couple of really great performances, though. Howie says, breathtaking, pun intended. I had anxiety the whole time, and that turkey baster scene made my heart drop to my ass. I swear I actually wasn't breathing. 9 out of 10. And then finally, Achilles Neil says, the protagonists weren't like stupid or anything, but damn, I would survive this so easily. 7 out of 10. Is this just one of those movies where you just think, yeah, you know what? I think I would survive this.
Yeah, this is, I mean, as much as you don't want Stephen Lang's hand, for him to get his hands on you, barring that, yeah, you should be able to turn the tables pretty easily.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about that at length. I've decided, given that you're back on the show, that I'm going to bring back our letterbox shit review segment. I've renamed the segment and we've just called it the shit show now. So we basically just have a look through some of these sites where we talk about the movie and just reading out some of the shit reviews, because it's very easy. I think one of the things that sort of over now, I think we're coming up for our 2-year anniversary in the next few months of this podcast. One of the things we've sort of learned is, for as much as we love our listeners and their thoughts and opinions, you guys are very generous. It was one of the things that Wren, I think, highlighted when he was on this show, that our listeners are heavy generous about a lot of the movies that we talk about. So I decided to bring back the shit show just for the interests of balance. So this one person writes, every minute was more terrible than the last. Somehow each time I thought it could not get more stupid, it did. Wow. There is probably something to be said for the stupidity of our characters, because they make some horrendous decisions.
Yeah, I still don't get either the like the bottle in the room like that. He put that in there, he's out, and then 2 seconds later he's in the room. So
yeah, like what the fuck was that all about? Like, you could have just handcuffed him to the bed or something there and then, and bound and gagged him, and you probably would have had a much better outcome. So yeah, I'm not too sure about that. This next person says, to be honest, I would rather not breathe than have to rewatch this. It's always good when viewers would rather choose death than watching a movie, Well, this next person goes, this person is shouting this is in all capitals. Why would you pee on the floor of a home you are burglarizing? Did the wet bandits teach you nothing? We didn't even talk about the fact that he is just pissing on the floor of the houses that they burgle. Yeah. A loss for words. So fucking lame and somehow borderline offensive. 5 out of 5 for unlikable characters. I think we're in agreement with that one. Why did the cum jar contain so many hairs? For anyone, Zogglebox has just joined us in the chat. If you've not seen this movie, you might have no fucking clue what we're talking about. But there's a cum jar in this movie that's got hairs in it. Pretty bog standard stuff, right?
Is apparently a very angry masturbator.
Yeah. Finally, cum is usually where I draw the line, and this movie had so much damn cum in it. And I think if I never say that again on the podcast, I think it will be just too soon. Thank you to everyone who sent us your thoughts, opinions, and scores on the movie. Boomer, that doesn't leave. I'm missing someone out. I'm missing out Nico, because even though he's not here, he still decided to leave me with his score for this movie. Nico is a big fan of this movie, and he's given it an 8 out of 10. So high score from Nico. Nico's a generous score. If Nico likes a movie, he just scores it generously, and if he dislikes, there's no middle ground with that man. And if you're listening to this, Nico, fuck you. That just leaves me and you. Boomer, on a scale of 0 to 10, what would you rate Don't Breathe?
All right, and I am disappointed in these letterboxd reviews. Somebody definitely missed the trick of saying like this movie should have been called Don't Watch, but oh well. So we talked about the good, we talked about the bad, and to me they are. It's pretty even. This movie is right down the middle for me because it does so much right, and then just tanks itself right there at the end. But also, I mean, even before we get there, we've talked about some of the logic issues and all kinds of some of the problems that it has. And I think that like whenever I first messaged you, you thought I was going to come down probably like really low on this film, but there are some things that I do enjoy about it, and so it is smack in the middle. This is a 5 out of 10 for me. It's fine.
You're right. I did think you were going to come down a little bit lower than that. But I think that's the thing. I think there is sort of a universal, understanding that there's a lot of good in this movie. There's a lot of stuff done right. This stuff is in the hands of people who clearly know what they're doing, and they've ratcheted up the tension of this movie. We've talked about the tension and the sort of general atmosphere and the performances and some of those shots. This is a movie that's in general done really, really well. Apart from that scene, that scene just takes so much out of this movie. Yes, is it shocking? Absolutely, it's completely shocking. Like, this movie does definitely have that holy fucking shit moment, but it's not a holy shit moment that should be there. It's so out of place, and it definitely is a big detractor of this movie for me. Without that scene, or had they gone one of the other ways that we talked about earlier, I could easily see me giving this movie an 8 or a 9 out of 10. Mm-hmm. I really think it's that well made. However, I can't give it that score with that in it. I'm still going to give it a slightly higher score than you've given it, because I would still go back and revisit this movie. I still recommend that people go check this movie out. I'm going to give it a 6.5.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. I knew it was going to be lower than you were on it, and I'm completely fair with my rating. Like, I have not watched this movie since it came back out. Had no desire to until you put that on the list, and I was like, okay, well, I gotta watch it. But it's not one that ever comes up for me, like in chats, people for recommendations or anything, and I haven't returned to it. So it's just yeah.
It also continues the thread of you coming on this podcast to talk about movies that you're not particularly high on as well, after your appearance for Lost Boys the Tribe, So that's Lost Boys the Tribe. At least you liked House of a Thousand Corpses. So
I loved House of a Thousand Corpses. Yeah, I was higher on that one. I love that movie. Yeah.
But yes, so 6.5 from me, 8 from Nico, 5 from yourself, Boomer. I think, I can see why Nico's rating it that high. I can see why people really like this movie. But for me, I can also see the people who are on the total opposite end of that scale and are just hating on it. So yeah, I think when you've got something in your movie that is so polarizing, that for so many people, that one scene completely switches them off from this movie and turns this movie into a 1 out of 10 or a 0 out of 10. That scene literally has the potential to do that for a lot of people. I think for us to sort of fall in that sort of middle ground, that sort of 5-6 sort of range, I think is about right. With that being said, all of our scores combined with the critics and you, our listeners, scores gives Don't Breathe an average score of 7.3 out of 10, and it puts it in 31st place of the now 76 movies that we have reviewed on this podcast. It's one place above An American Werewolf in London and one place below Saw. It's an interesting place to be for this movie, I think.
Yeah.
I think I would rather... I mean, I wasn't as high on An American Werewolf in London on a rewatch, which I know is pretty sacrilegious to a lot of people out there. I actually rated it the same as I rated Don't Breathe. I also gave that movie a 6.5. I think, and I kind of think I stand by that. I think if someone was to say, oh, which one of these two would you rather watch? I'm not 100% sure I'd know which one to pick. I would, however, much rather watch Saw than both of those movies. So, that's just kind of where my taste lies. But it's really
funny.
Carry on.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say it's really funny because I would much rather watch An American Werewolf in London than The Adventures of a Turkey Baster. And Saw, like where it's at. It's crazy because Saw in this movie are kind of similar for me. Like, I'm not like the biggest Saw franchise fan in the world. So yeah, I mean, The American Werewolf, yes, is kind of the outlier for me, but those two right there together at 31 makes all the sense to the world, honestly.
It's becoming very interesting because obviously the further and further we get into this podcast and the more and more that this sort of leaderboard that we're creating kind of takes form, the more movies that get into it. If you look at our leaderboard and say that whole section of movies, I would say from 20 to 40, which I would say is just slightly above halfway now on our leaderboard. So these are all movies that are kind of in the top half, but people aren't saying that they're great. They're not the best. You look at like our top 10, things like Alien and Halloween and Reanimator and The Lost Boys and The Shining. These are the absolute classics. But even when you go down to that, it's like, there's a lot of movies in there now that people will consider absolute classics and the greatest movies of all time. In 20th place, for example, is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which for some people is the iconic horror movie. I'm just having a quick look down. Evil Dead Rise in 22nd, Army of Darkness in 24th, Hellraiser now in 26th place, Screams in 28th, Saw in 30th, and even slightly below what's Don't Breathe, you've got the original Child's Play in 34th, The Conjuring in 35th, Event Horizon in 39th, House of a Thousand Corpses sitting in 40th place now. These are movies that we all love, that we would say are exceptional horror movies, but turns out that they're maybe just not as widely loved as maybe once thought. And that's the sort of whole point of the leaderboard as well. It's very easy for me and Nico to come on here and just be like, we're going to make a leaderboard of what we think is the top movies of all time, but we want we want it to be a fair leaderboard and take into account as many different opinions and thoughts as we can. So and I'm not saying that we've got the definitive list, because I think that would be that would my ego would be through the roof if I said that. But I think it maybe just give an indication of what's potentially are those sort of true classics, and what maybe are absolutely great horror movies, but maybe just aren't as widely loved as some people think they are.
Yeah, I mean that's interesting. You know what? I've never done it. I'm going to have to go back and put our own list together. Now our list is completely subjective, so we don't take the credits because I don't care. So we don't take them into account. But I'm interested to see. I think we're right around 50 episodes or so at this point. So I need to go and kind of like archive and find out just where we fell on all the movies that we've done. I think that would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, and like when I'm, when I look at my leaderboard, because I have it in front of me and I have the full breakdown in front of me as well, and it's just really interesting because even when you go, into that sort of bottom half now on our leaderboard, you mentioned The Strangers earlier. That movie's sitting in 51st place at the moment, and both me and Nico were relatively high on that movie, but it's a movie that widely was not particularly well received. Sacrilegious to a lot of people, Halloween 3 is now in 72nd place. That's really upset, continues to upset a lot of people. But you've got the House of Wax remake, which although is campy, I think is a pretty fun movie. That's sitting in 65th. You've got Silent Hill in 61st. So there's some big hitters down there as well. Saw 2's in 56th. So there's some bigger hitters down near the bottom end of our leaderboard as well. So it's very interesting. It's one of the reasons why I'm a person who loves stats and facts and tables and leaderboards and things like that. So I get very excited every time I get to add something new to our leaderboard. Is there anything else that you would like to speak about in terms of Don't Breathe, or anything like that before we get into getting ourselves out of here and doing our plugs and talking about podcasts and things?
No, I've talked quite enough. I've hijacked the show. I know we're running long. I have a tendency to talk a lot more when I don't have to edit. So no, I'll just shut up.
No, but that's fine because, as you very well know, I don't really edit that much. So, and the more you talk, the less I have to. So, that's always fine by me. Well, that is going to do it then for the podcast portion of this broadcast. If you are watching us live, stick around because me and Boomer will be around here for a little while longer. Not too much longer, Boomer, because I don't want to take up all of your Sunday afternoon, but a little while longer. But in terms of the podcast, if you're listening to this on the download, thank you so much to everyone who has tuned in and joined us. We really appreciate it. Once again, Boomer, thank you for coming on. Would you like to just remind everyone about Podcast in the Woods and where you can be found?
Yeah, we are on all podcasting platforms, so Spotify and Apple and Stitcher, all the ones, Google Play and all those things. You can find us on all of those. And if you search for Podcast the Woods, we pop right up. Didn't happen initially. I was like, oh shit, nobody's going to listen to the show. But if you if you Google Podcast in the Woods, we will pop right up if you're having issues finding it. Shout out to my co-host Gabby, who I run that with. Gabby, I love you. And yeah, we are on the Twitters and Instagrams. That is Woods Podcast 1. We do have a Patreon, and that is patreon.com/Woods Podcast. And we also are on the Slasher app. So just download the Slasher app and you can search for Podcast the Woods. Same thing with Facebook. So we're all over the place out there. If you look very hard at all, you're going to find some of the shit that we do.
And I would highly recommend checking out their episode on Scream 6. They had a top tier guest on for that episode.
It's the best work we've ever done.
Yeah. Also, yeah, big shout out to Gabby as well. I know Gabby's been lurking away and she's been floating about in the chat as well. So thank you so much for watching us chat our shit about Don't Breathe. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so. We're on Twitter at Damn Podcast. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Pod of the Damned. You can email us at podofthedamned@gmail.com, and you can also subscribe to our Patreon as well, which is patreon.com/Pod of the Damned. If you're listening to this on the download and you're thinking to yourself, hey, I'd quite like to watch one of these live episodes, then you can follow us on Twitch. It's twitch.tv/Pod of the Damned. And we are also available in all of those places that Boomer just mentioned at Podcast in the Woods. Why not give yourself a nice double feature, subscribe to both podcasts, have a look and see which movies we've both covered, and see what we all have to say about them. I think that'd be a pretty good way to spend your afternoon, Boomer.
I do too. I think that would be phenomenal. Yeah, listen to just start off with like a little bit of our show and then get into the real masterpiece that is Pod of the Damned, because we don't want to look bad after listening to their show. But
oh, you are too kind. You're too kind. Anyways, right. Let's get out of here for this portion of the session. Once again, Boomer, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you to everyone who's listened to us on the download. And until next week on the Pod of the Damned, just remember, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.